You thought you were empathetic, mature, selfless. But what if your empathy was never freedom? What if it was conditioning? What if, as a child, you learned that your survival depended on managing someone else's emotions? Because when a parent turns a child into their emotional partner, their therapist, their confidant, their reason for stability, the child doesn't get to develop a self. They develop hyper-vigilance instead. They learn to scan rooms before they enter them, to read facial expressions like warning signs, to shrink before anyone asks them to. And everyone around them calls it maturity. They call it a gift. But it wasn't maturity. It was adaptation. It was a nervous system that learned very early that other people's emotional states were more important and more dangerous than their own. This is called emotional incest. And unlike the abuse most people recognize, it leaves no visible marks, no raised voices, no locked doors, no obvious cruelty. Just a child who slowly stopped existing for themselves and started existing entirely for someone else. And here's what makes it so difficult to name. The parent wasn't always malicious. They were often loving, warm even. They told you everything because they trusted you. They leaned on you because you were strong. But a child cannot be strong for a parent without paying an enormous cost. That cost is their own psychological development. Because while other children were learning what they wanted, what they felt, who they were becoming, you were learning how to keep someone else from falling apart. And the worst part? You were praised for it. So you carried it forward, into friendships, into work, into every relationship that followed. Always the one who holds it together. Always the one who senses when something is wrong before it's spoken. Always the one who gives and gives and gives, until there is nothing left, and then feels guilty for being empty. If any of this is landing somewhere real in you, stay with me, because what I'm about to walk you through isn't just psychology. It's a map back to yourself. Core goal. Introduce emotional incest as covert abuse hidden beneath closeness, best friend parenting, or emotional dependency. Emotional incest doesn't look like what we're taught to recognize as abuse. There's no physical violence, no obvious cruelty. In many cases, there's a lot of love, but love can still be misplaced. And when a parent places their emotional needs onto a child, something quietly breaks inside that child's development. This is called covert incest, or emotional incest, and it happens when a child is pulled into an emotional role they were never meant to carry. They become the parent's emotional regulator, their therapist, their confidant, their reason for getting out of bed. The child learns, without anyone saying a word, that their job is to manage how another person feels. And they get very good at it, because getting good at it is how they stay safe. This is enmeshment, when the psychological boundaries between a parent and child collapse, and the child loses the space to develop a separate self. Here's what makes it so hard to name. The parent rarely does this intentionally, and the child rarely experiences it as abuse, at least not at first. They experience it as closeness, as being needed, as being special. She told me everything. I felt responsible for keeping her stable. Everyone said I was mature for my age. Those memories feel warm, until the day you realize that warmth cost you your childhood. When a child is chronically placed in a caretaking role, something specific happens to their nervous system. They stop developing inward, toward their own desires, preferences, and identity, and begin developing outward, toward threat detection, toward other people's moods, toward whatever they need to be in order to keep the emotional environment stable. This is called parentification, and it doesn't only happen when a child cooks meals or raises siblings. It happens every time a child suppresses their own needs to manage a parent's emotional state. The internal message becomes hardwired. My needs are dangerous. Other people matter more. If I take up space, someone will fall apart. So the child learns to feel selfish for resting, panicked when they disappoint someone, completely blank when asked what they want, because wanting things was never safe. Their identity becomes externally organized, built around what other people need from them, rather than who they actually are. And by the time they reach adulthood, they have mastered the art of self-abandonment. They just don't recognize it as abandonment. They call it love. By adulthood, the nervous system has been trained with a very specific and painful equation. Intimacy equals emotional labor. Closeness means losing yourself. Being needed means being trapped. So what does the nervous system do? It avoids real intimacy, or it pursues people who are emotionally unavailable. because an unavailable person can't actually get close enough to trigger the old enmeshment wound. This is hyper-independence as trauma adaptation, not strength, not preference, a protective mechanism that developed because being emotionally close to someone once meant carrying their entire world. So, when a genuinely caring, available, emotionally healthy person shows up, it doesn't feel like love. It feels suspicious, overwhelming, suffocating. Meanwhile, someone cold or inconsistent feels like chemistry, feels like home. Because the nervous system doesn't recognize safety as romantic. It recognizes familiarity. I lose myself in relationships. I feel trapped when someone needs me. I can care for people, but I can't relax with them. This isn't a character flaw. This is a nervous system doing exactly what it was trained to do. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that has no obvious cause. You're not overworked by external standards. You're not sick. You haven't experienced any single catastrophic event, but you are drained, constantly, from the inside out. This is the long-term cost of emotional parentification. When you grow up being the emotional center of someone else's world, you become addicted to caretaking. Not because it feels good, but because your nervous system doesn't know how to exist without a role to play. So you become the strong one, the one people call in crisis, the one who holds everything together while silently falling apart. And underneath all of that strength is chronic guilt. A guilt that was never earned, it was installed. You feel guilty for resting, guilty for saying no, guilty for wanting something for yourself, guilty for existing without being useful, and eventually, resentment builds toward the very people you're exhausting yourself for. But the guilt won't let you say it, so it turns inward instead. This is functional depression, anxiety that disguises itself as responsibility, a secret loneliness that survives even when you're surrounded by people who need you. I feel emotionally drained after every interaction. I resent people for needing me, then hate myself for feeling that way. I'm always around people, but I've never felt more alone. Healing from emotional incest isn't about cutting people off or becoming cold. It's about learning that you are allowed to exist separately from other people's needs. The first step is differentiation, learning to feel where you end and another person begins. Understanding that their pain is not your responsibility to fix. Their discomfort is not your emergency. Boundaries are not walls. They are not cruelty. In the body of someone who grew up enmeshed, a boundary is a nervous system repair. It says, I can love you without disappearing into you. The second step is grief, because there is real grief here. For the childhood that was spent in service of someone else's emotions, for the years you spent confusing caretaking with love, for the version of yourself you never got to become because you were too busy keeping someone else together. That grief is valid, and it needs to be felt, not suppressed, not bypassed with forgiveness before it's ready. Many women discover anger beneath that grief, real anger. And that anger is not a problem, it is information. It is the part of you that always knew something was wrong. The third step is desire. What do you actually want? Not what you should want, not what would make someone else happy. What do you, the person underneath all the conditioning, actually want? That question can feel impossible at first. That's normal. You were never allowed to answer it. But it's the most important question you will ever learn to sit with. Here is the hardest thing to accept. You could not have saved them. Not as a child, not now, not ever. Because children cannot emotionally rescue adults. It was never possible. And the fact that you spent your childhood trying, that says everything about your capacity for love and nothing about your failure. Your parents' loneliness was never your burden to carry. Their instability was not your fault to solve. Their pain was real, but it was not yours to heal. You can have compassion for them without being enmeshed with them. You can understand their wounds without living inside them. That is the difference between love and merger. And for many people, this realization comes with a strange mixture of relief and grief. Relief that the job was never really yours, and grief that you spent so long believing it was. The inner caretaker, the part of you that scans for danger, that anticipates needs, that cannot rest until everyone else is okay, that part deserves care too. It doesn't need to be eliminated. It needs to be held, understood, thanked for what it did to keep you safe, and then gently told, you can rest now. because you are not a child anymore. You are not responsible for holding anyone else together. And healing, real healing, begins not when you forgive them. It begins when you stop abandoning yourself in order to love them.